So good.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of So Good Theory. In the last episode we talked about the new character coming to Super Smash Bros. If you haven't seen that, check it out with the link in the description. For today's video we aren't going to be straying far from Smash Bros. We'll stay within the Nintendo brand, taking a look at Pokemon, and more specifically I'll be proving the existence of a hidden 810th Pokemon that has existed in fact since the second generation. We're talking a Pokemon so rare most people have never even encountered it, being so rare in fact that it puts shiny legendaries to shame. A Pokemon so deadly it kills most of the Pokemon it interacts with, yet at the same time it has the ability to power other Pokemon up, making them twice as strong as they were before. And as if that wasn't significant enough, it's never been entered into a poke-dex, and most Pokemon professors are not even sure what it is. Now, I know from the description you might think I'm talking about some kind of unreleased mythical Pokemon, or maybe a glitch Pokemon, like ? Or the famous Missing No, but it is actually not that special. So, what is this Pokemon? Well, it has a name already, and that name is Pokerus. Now, Pokerus is not actually considered a Pokemon, at least that's what the few NPCs who talk about it in the game are willing to say, calling them tiny life forms instead. It's also pretty common thought amongst the Pokemon community that Pokerus is in fact not a Pokemon, but I'm here today to in fact prove the opposite. Not only is Pokerus a Pokemon, it also has a type, ability, and signature moves just like some other Pokemon that we're so fond of. To prove this, first we'll have to discuss what Pokerus is and what it does. There are plenty of videos that will go in depth onto what Pokerus does in the games. I would recommend checking out J-Wits, so for the sake of this video I will keep it simple. Alright, so aside from Pokerus being the rarest Pokemon ever created, being encountered only one in every 22,000 battles, Pokerus also has two signature effects. The better known ability is the one that we see in the games. That being that when your Pokemon contracts Pokerus, it gets a huge buff. This buff effectively makes it stronger, faster, and healthier, and it does this by doubling a Pokemon's effort values or EVs. This effectively doubles the stats that a Pokemon gains when it levels up, effectively making them twice as strong as a Pokemon of the same species at the same level. Now, this first effect may seem awesome, and admittedly, in the games, it's pretty freaking great. But there's a second effect Pokerus can have on Pokemon, and this effect is in fact fatal. See, Pokerus, like regular viruses, can infect a Pokemon and reproduce without limit, killing a Pokemon and infecting everything around it. In the episode Oaknapped of Pokemon Chronicles, it is revealed to Professor Oak that a certain evil Dr. Namba has been experimenting on Pokemon by infecting them with the virus in hopes that it would make them stronger. His Pokemon Power Acceleration Plan, as he dubbed it. But his research ran into a snag, as every Pokemon that he had infected ended up dying. This happened on every single one of his test subjects until he eventually ran out of the virus. At least it's good to know that underneath all the incompetence and tomfoolery, Team Rocket is still filled with bonafide homicidal maniacs who are okay with killing Pokemon by droves. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, because it relates back to the reason why Pokerus is not considered a Pokemon. See, in our real world, viruses are not considered living organisms like lions, platypuses, and bacteria. Just to sharpen you up a bit in the fields of microbiology and virology, a living thing is usually defined as having a few key characteristics. The most notable of those being metabolism, growth, and reproduction. Lions, platypuses, and bacteria all reproduce through conventional means, those being of reproducing through budding or sexual reproduction. Viruses are different. See, viruses can't actually reproduce unless they come into contact with other cells, in which they automatically hijack the nucleus of other cells and turn them into factories that produce more of the virus. This is kind of like someone hacking your printer and making it print out endless subscribe to PewDiePie flyers. See, viruses can only reproduce in the presence of cells, in which they do so automatically. This means that viruses would in fact not exist if living beings didn't exist in tandem with them to produce cells for them to hijack. And it also makes them the only quote-unquote beings in existence that require creatures of a different species to reproduce. Many microbiologists in fact consider this to be proof that viruses are not in fact alive or dead. Or at least, it's a heavily debated topic in the field of virology and microbiology. So, after going through this lesson of viruses, one might think this strengthens the theory of why Pokerus is not considered a virus. That being because it's based on a virus, and in our real world, viruses aren't considered animals or living things. But here's where my first issue with this theory comes from, and it comes from a very well-established Pokemon type, that being Ghost. See, Ghost-type Pokemon sit in a similarly gray area to viruses. For one, we actually don't know if Ghost Pokemon are technically alive or not. I mean, most of them are departed souls from other beings. On top of that, Ghost types don't breed like other Pokemon. Now, I know what you might be saying. After all, Ghost-type Pokemon reproduce normally in the games, and if you put them in the daycare, they produce an egg, just like most other Pokemon. But it's not as simple as the games make it seem. To prove that these Ghost Pokemon breed in dramatically different ways, one needs to take a look at their poke-dex entries. Honedge, for example, is said to be born when a departed soul bonds itself with a sword. Phantump is the reanimated remains of a rotted tree stump possessed by woodland spirits. Drifloon is a collection of spirits wrapped up in a balloon-like ghostly skin. Sandygast needs a sandcastle to possess, and Pumpkaboo needs a pumpkin to possess. You may already be starting to see some of the similarities that the Ghost type shares with viruses, in that it can only produce an egg or reproduce if certain circumstances are met, and in fact wouldn't even exist without the presence of living beings. Sure, you get an egg in the games, but that begs the question, what kind of sinister things were your Pokemon up to in the daycare?
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Now, this connection to viruses that Ghost-type Pokemon share is pretty compelling, but it's not the only bit of evidence I have to prove that Pokerus is in fact a Pokemon deserving of its own Pokedex entry. And that second connection can be found in your non-gendered Pokemon, your Voltorbs, Starmies, Miniors, and Legendaries. These Pokemon have no genders, and thus can't reproduce like other Pokemon. Now, for some Pokemon, I'm sure they have specific reasons for this limitation, and even actual methods of reproduction. Legendaries, after all, have been shown to be able to breed. I just don't think they let you do this in the game so that you can't be spawning infinite numbers of Legendaries. And Starmie, for example, can't reproduce in the games because it has no gender, but a starfish in real life reproduces by budding into another starfish. But for some Pokemon, well, there's no explanation given. Well, it's actually simple enough, because we actually know of a way to create more of these genderless Pokemon, and that is, in fact, through the nifty little Pokemon called Ditto. See, Ditto is itself a genderless Pokemon that can breed with other Pokemon, including other genderless Pokemon. That's right, from what we can tell, these genderless Pokemon need Ditto to reproduce. That key connection right there proves that what it means to be a Pokemon isn't the same as what it means to be an animal or a living being in our real world. What's more is that Ditto themselves can't actually reproduce to create more Ditto. They can reproduce with any Pokemon, but they can't reproduce with more Ditto. That right there proves that Pokerus must be a Pokemon. I mean, just think about it. Pokerus is essentially a reverse Ditto. See, it can reproduce with any Pokemon, but create more copies of itself instead of creating copies of the other Pokemon. In the games, this is backed up because Pokerus can actively infect any Pokemon and reproduce from its DNA. So, if Ghost types, genderless Pokemon, and Ditto are all considered Pokemon, Pokerus should definitely be considered one as well. Okay, so now that we've established that Pokerus is in fact a Pokemon, the natural next question is, what type would it be? And if you ask me, the type would have to be normal. Now look, I know that from the previous points made, one might think that Ghost type is the obvious pick for Pokerus, or maybe Poison because of Pokerus's aforementioned deadly tendencies. but it couldn't be poison type because Pokerus has never given a Pokemon it infects the poison status. What's more is that Pokerus can in fact give Pokemon incredible buffs that make them much stronger, very unlike the debuffing poison type. Now, Ghost-type Pokemon might actually make sense. I mean, in a way, it's almost like Pokerus is the pre-evolution for all other Ghost types. Just think, if most Ghost Pokemon need the souls of other Pokemon or human beings so that they can become Ghost types, then Pokerus is going around killing Pokemon and quote-unquote evolving into the Ghost types that require lost souls and something to possess. Now, this sounds cool and all, and I'd honestly think it was awesome, but there's one glaring flaw with this theory. If Pokerus was Ghost type, it wouldn't be able to affect normal type Pokemon, like Zigzagoon and Blissey, because normal types are immune to ghost attacks. And Pokerus definitely still infects these Pokemon. No, Pokerus is definitely normal type, and there's a few reasons for that. See, normal types are all Pokemon that represent pretty simple animals and concepts. Cows, pigeons, beavers, normal types represent the most basic of all Pokemon. And what's simpler than a virus? They're smaller than cells, and they can only be seen under extreme magnification. On top of that, normal types can attack ghost-type Pokemon. See, that's where Pokerus's ability comes into play. The ability would be Scrappy. It allows normal types and fighting types to hit and affect ghost-type Pokemon. With this ability, Pokerus would be able to fully affect all Pokemon, regardless of type. Besides, if Pokemon like Porygon are basic enough to be considered normal types, then Pokerus definitely should. Porygon Z is basically a computer virus. And bringing back our old friend Ditto, we remember that Ditto is basically just a reverse virus. He takes other Pokemon's DNA and instead of producing more copies of himself, produces copies of them. He's basically a virus already, albeit a pretty weird one. So, agreeing that Pokerus is a normal type with the ability that allows it to hit all other Pokemon, I think it's only fair that Pokerus have two exclusive signature moves, and like Ditto, Pokerus can't learn anything other than its signature moves. Those moves being one status move and one damaging attack. For the sake of simplicity, let's call the status move Viral Boost, and its effect gives the targeted Pokemon a boost to its EVs. This is the move it would use to give Pokemon its beneficial buffs. Now it's the other move, let's call it Viral Bomb, that actively does damage to an infected Pokemon, slowly killing it over time. Now a key point I'm not mentioning here is why Pokerus kills some Pokemon and doesn't kill others. After all, it would be fair to say that at least one person's Pokemon should die if all of Dr. Namba's Pokemon died, right? And I assure you, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this, but that's the case for my next video. For now, I've made my case for Pokerus being a Pokemon, and with that, I'll go ahead and give it its inaugural Pokedex entries for Pokemon Sword and Shield.
Pokerus. It is a strange being that infects all species of Pokemon. Some say it can give regular Pokemon incredible power. Pokerus. It's only recently been classified as a Pokemon. Research shows that Pokerus can kill the Pokemon it infects.
Thank you so much for watching, guys, and if you liked this video, please don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, but most importantly, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think about this video. Does the theory make sense to you? Are you excited to see what Pokemon Sword and Shield does with the lore of Pokerus? I always love hearing from you guys, and it's honestly the main reason why I even make these videos. Anyway, as always, this has been so good, and I'll see you guys next time. Until then, remember to keep on loving good stuff.